So this paper is called Nickel's Graphic Cratylism and the Mimeographic Theories of Alfred Callier. Callier, has anybody heard of Callier? He's not well known, and his books are impossible to get. He just did this one book, Sign and Design, written in German, translated into English, and recently a second edition's come out in German, but notoriously unknown. And so what I'm going to try to argue is that Barry read his work. Okay. So this paper is going to circulate around one question. Which came first, the thing or the word? And I take it also as a natural extension of my earlier work on the martyrology as paragram. I don't wish to produce a new theory or place for Nickel's work in a new genealogy as I did there. In that well-received essay from the 1980s, I tried to situate Nickel's work not in a natural lineage along a modernist, postmodernist axis, but inside Enlightenment theories of false wit, Saussure's writings on the paragram, and in that Platonic linguistics that we can glean from Plato's dialogue Cratylus. Arguably, the strangest of Plato's dialogues, Cratylus deals with the epistemological status of onomastics, the relation of a name to the thing it names. Against Hermogenes' nominalist contention that a word's relationship to the thing it names is conventional and arbitrary, Cratylus adopts the realist position, arguing for a natural relationship that is correct and true. Socrates supplies the intermediary of a secondary mimologism between these two extremes and approaches it to argue that the relation between name and thing should be correct, but it is frequently arbitrary. In its broad sense, the Cratylus is a comment on the alienation of language from nature, a sense dear to B.P. Nickel in his own equation of word-world. One Cratylian theory of mimography that Nickel was aware of is that of Austrian mystic Alfred Callier, whose book Sign and Design, the Psychogenetic Source of the Alphabet, appeared in English translation in 1961, and a copy of which Nickel owned. I know that because I borrowed it. Nickel's obsession with the individual letter is well known, but the reference of the letter's history via Callier is not. Here's the formula. You look at letters and fiction begins. In a curious blend of Jung and Cratylus, Callier offers a highly moot and speculative theory on the psychogenetic development of the alphabet from a metric set of primordial signs present in a collective unconscious. And that, incidentally, is not unlike Hugo Ball's notion of the sound poem, as he talks about it in his notes. So anyway, these are from a collective unconscious and sequentially encode, and to quote Callier, a magic chain of procreative symbols destined to safeguard the human race, unquote. The signs themselves derive from a multiplicity of body parts and objects: arms, penis, breasts, houses, vaginas, mountains. No doubt, Nickel would have been attracted to Callier's theory of the pictographic origin of letters, as well as the holistic nature of the speculative the speculative agreements for both a graphic and phonic cratylism. However, Callier laminates an elaborate psychosexual narrative upon his theory. The first letter A, for example, has, and this is my PowerPoint of it, okay? The first letter A, for example, has the literal interpretation of a frontal view of an ox's head, an image, and you turn it upside down like that, an image of virility that further carries in the horns the pictograph of the male member and all its procreative and inseminatory embarrassments. Similarly, the second letter B carries the image of the feminine, the breasts and belly clearly depicted in the double curvilinear shape of the letter. Capital C depicts the womb open for impregnation. D is the growing womb. O, the act of penetration. On the later alphabetic characters, Callier theorizes a link between the letter Y and V treating the former as a variant form of the letter V. It is similarly seen as a tree symbol and linked to the eye shape as an absorbed proto-sign, not to mention the female genitalia, which both mimeographic and mimeophonic V, cuneus, the Latin wedge, as in cunt, cuneiform. There is no compelling reasons to suggest Nickel was fully influenced by Kalir's sexuation of the alphabet, and direct reference to the book are few and far between in his writings. There is a fairly extended quotation from the introduction in Passages, the Bissett Papers, written in 1971 as a planned introduction to Bissett's Pass the Food, Release the Spirit book. It occurs in a passage where Nickel is discussing the pictographic origins of the alphabet. Kalir himself is contrasting science and magic and postulates that the, quote, totality within the human psyche is at first achieved within one human being, unquote, as opposed to a collective conventional consensus. Nickel takes up and elaborates upon the mantic possibilities of writing, and here I quote him. Kalir is saying more or less what W.C. Williams said, that we are reflexively mouthing a dead language unless we bring magic in, and by magic he means the perception of the whole of the organic body. This may help explain Nickel's attraction to the mantic propensities in the Dada sound poetry of his early hero Hugo Ball, but it does not elucidate what I contend is the lasting influence of Kalir's speculations into the psychosexual origins of Western alphabetic characters. The second reference to Kalir occurs in a 1973 letter to Mary Ellen Salt, the scholar and practitioner of concrete poetry. The letter is part autobiographical in so much as it attempts to delineate the evolution of Nickel's visual poetry. And I quote the relevant passage. The other thing that happened was a sudden integration of my breathline poetry, my belief in sound, and my literal obsession with a single letter and what it contains as element of word, a sound unit, and in terms of its own history, vis-a-vis Alfred Kalir's Sign and Design. I had in my comic strip drawings frequently included letters floating in the sky or simply standing in their middle of the landscape. One notable feature of Plato's dialogue is a hint of a lost linguistic perfection. Names should bear a natural connection to the things they name, but this is often not the case. In a reconciliatory move, Socrates hypothesizes the necessary existence of a divine name-giver who attempted to establish the Crotilian naturalistic equation, but the divine name-goer was subject to error, an infelicity further compounded by the very changeableness of meaning and the ineluctable flux of phenomena. Names are needed to stabilize things in the flux, to divide and thereby individualize. In Nickel, the eye-ear split is taken to its extreme. On one hand, in his irreducibly graphic text, and on the other, in his sound text, and a similar longing for unity, or more accurately, reunity, can be traced through much of Nickel's work. It is palpable, for example, in his essay Sound and the Lung Wage, which, as well as emphasizing the formation of the alphabet as primarily a linguistic code, laments the eye-ear split, the seemingly impossible reconciliation of the phonic with graphic elements of language. I contend too that this sense of this same desire is evident in the obsessions with mirror images, the I and the I and the H and M and W relation, for instance, the mirror structuring of such individual letters as B and P and H, and in his palindromic playfulness, ma I, ma I am. In all of his wordplay and linguistic speculation, not only does Nickel go against the Saussurean rule of the unmotivated sign, but further moves to motivate the individual letters in a territory outside of primary articulations. Letters are emancipated into cartoon codes, art brute allegories and architectures within a comic strip semiology of bubbles, balloons and panels. Fully motivated, the mirror phenomenon legitimates a release of poetic Quintilian logic that is ludic in its timbre, and that Nickel sometimes termed schizophrenic logic. I give you my word in W or D, and I accept that W is H in hold a wand in a hand. I present two of my own examples here as a way of demonstrating that the process is neither exotic nor hermetic, but an intense, vertiginous localization of sign production. And I'll give now a passage from the Martyrology Book 5, Chain 2, that's on the handout. Even in my ignorance, I know you are, I am me, ma, peel, delight, delip, spill, Sam tips. I saw he kept 10 or want L to of one lost soul, no footle let 10 or one speak, Was I spit Mars lip spoiled? Sam didn't catch 'em then, but what's with all this dick tracing, patting of the past between the H and M's, the dearth, and B and M's, a birth dance of its own part of the mirthology, reworking one book or rebooking work one, or one work to rebook, and G in the S, peak, eek is part of the equation. Equations hung from an E informs the scream, cream only if the C reams, eek my love and eek my few, follow these vowel changes for what they teach me. This is a dazzling example of what Jacobson calls the poetic function in action, by which every aspect of language, sound, shape, letter, word, shows the capacity to become motivated, replete with Joycean portmanteaus, homophones, palindromes and puns, and also a reference to the Avengers. Nickel exposes the materiality of language in a way quite different from the early work of the language poets. Well, Lynn Haginian, for instance, exploits iteration and reflexiveness, and Bruce Andrews stages the emancipation of signifiers in a festive expenditure of idiolactyl graffiti. Nickel reveals the sheer bulk of language as a shifting mass of meanings, more contingent and auto-heuristic than instrumental. Nickel believed puns to be glimpses of another truth, which ricochet playfulness into battlefields of metaphysics and epistemology. In conclusion, let me subject one short passage to examination in the light of this mimological theory, and this is the second piece on the handout. She births herself, the twin mouths of women, W's omen, it turns over and reverses itself. The mirrors cannot trick us, our words are spun within the sign our fathers left, the sibilance of S, the cross of T. They are finally no words for you, Father. Too many letters multiply the signs. You are the one, the unifying, no signifier when we cannot grasp the signified. Saints in between, the world of men, women. The sign completes, the W and the circle turning, add the E, the three levels linked by line, or the twofold vision, H to I, the saints return to this plane. Me, we, the emblem were there when I began 7 years to understand the first letter level of martyrdom. The sense of elucidation gained at the end of this passage is not earned by way of a benediction, but as the end product of an ordeal. It's worked out among a constellation of signifieds, mother, father, saints, sonorities, sibilant and consonant, and letter shapes, M, O, and W. Moreover, its outcome is intensely Platonic, as the following passage makes clear. There are, finally, no words for you, Father. Too many letters multiply the signs. You are the one, the unifying, no signifier when we cannot grasp the signified. The name fails when confronted with the relentless flux and sheer abundance of signifiers. And surprisingly, with a reference to Father, assumes the status of Plato's eidos, the stable form, uniting and unchanging. This itself returns us to the classical Saussurean matching of signifier and signified. Nicol explains in his letter to Salt the Cretilian motivation behind the 1970 book box Still Water, first titled The Chinese Poems. Quote, I was attempting through visual placement of the words involved with nouns only to evoke the power of the thing named, to reunite the signifier and the signified. Nicol's essay, The Patter of Letter Feet, is an ambitious attempt to fuse the pataphysical theories of Alfred Jarry with Fenollosa's studies into the Chinese ideogrammatic character, in order to arrive at the English letter as a medium for modern poetry. Nicol's evocation of Fenollosa here is very telling, as the Chinese written character argues that the shape of certain ideograms represents the shapes of natural signs. This returns us back to Cratylus. So I will finish at that point. Okay, thanks.